Let's talk about Parkinson's disease. You know, it affects about 1 million Americans, but for most of them, its true cause is a profound mystery. It really is one of modern medicine's most fascinating puzzles. So today, we're going to piece together all the clues, from our DNA to the world around us, to really get a handle on what science knows so far.
So, what is the real cause? That's the big question, right? It's what drives thousands of researchers and, of course, affects millions of families. And the thing is, the answer isn't some single culprit. No, it's a really complex story, one that's written in our genes, shaped by our environment, and plays out deep, deep inside our brains. To start cracking this case, we have to go right to the scene of the crime, deep inside the brain. The story of Parkinson's really begins in this tiny, dark-colored area called the Substantia Nigra. You can think of it as kind of like the mission control for one of the body's most important chemical messengers. And that messenger is dopamine. Now, you've probably heard of it as a feel-good chemical, but it's so much more than that. It's the critical signal that lets your brain tell your muscles what to do with smooth, controlled movements. Look, we all lose some of these dopamine-producing cells as we get older. But with Parkinson's, that process just goes into overdrive. It happens way faster and much, much earlier. And here's the part that is just staggering. The symptoms that we all associate with Parkinson's, the tremor, the stiffness, the slow movement, they don't even begin to show up until this much of the damage has already been done. We're talking 50 to 60% of those dopamine cells are already gone before the very first sign appears. So for years, the disease is just working in silence. So this really paints a picture of just how big this mystery is. For a huge majority, 80 to 90% of people with Parkinson's, there's no single clear-cut cause. Doctors call these cases idiopathic, which is really just a fancy way of saying we don't know the origin. Only a small sliver, about 10 to 20%, can be directly traced back to a specific genetic link. For almost everyone else, the answer is a lot more complicated. And that leads us right to the main theory in research today, which Dr. Dawson sums up perfectly here. For most people, Parkinson's isn't just one thing. It's more like a slow-burning reaction, this incredibly complex dance between the genes you were born with and all the unique things you've been exposed to over an entire lifetime. Okay, so let's grab that first piece of the puzzle, the genetic clues. I mean, even if it only explains a minority of cases, that family connection gives researchers these vital hints about how the disease actually works. And when you look at the statistics, they tell a pretty clear story. If you have a first-degree relative, so a parent or a sibling with Parkinson's, it roughly doubles your own risk. Now, it's really important to say that this is still a small overall risk, but it's a significant enough link that it gives researchers a genetic trail they can follow. So how does this whole genetic inheritance thing work? Well, it mostly happens in one of two ways. In what's called an autosomal dominant pattern, you only need to get one copy of a mutated gene from just one parent. But with autosomal recessive, the odds are a bit lower. For that, you'd need to inherit that specific mutated gene from both of your parents to see that increased risk. All right, on to the next piece of our puzzle, the environmental suspects. You know that old saying in genetics, genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into now. So what are these potential triggers that have researchers so curious? Well, researchers have zeroed in on several strong suspects. We're talking about long-term exposure to certain pesticides and herbicides, the infamous defoliant Agent Orange, and even industrial stuff like heavy metals and certain solvents. Now, the key thing to remember here is that none of these have been proven to be a definite cause. Instead, you should think of them as powerful risk factors, potential triggers in that very complex interaction we were talking about. Okay, but there's one potential trigger that always seems to get a lot of attention in the news, especially when we talk about famous athletes like Muhammad Ali. What about repeated head trauma? Getting blows to the head. Is there a direct link there? And this quote from Dr. Liana Rosenthal really captures what scientists think about this perfectly. While, repeated head trauma is considered a risk factor, the link isn't a straight line. It absolutely does not guarantee someone will develop the disease. It's just another important piece of the puzzle, but it is definitely not the whole picture. So, beyond our genes and our environment, there are two risk factors that are, pretty much unavoidable. They don't cause the disease on their own, but they are the strongest predictors we have for who is most likely to develop it. The single biggest risk factor for developing Parkinson's is, quite simply, getting older. The average age for symptoms to first pop up is right around 60 years old. And while, yes, younger onset Parkinson's is a thing, the risk just goes up and up as we age.
And the second major risk factor is gender. For reasons that scientists are still trying to figure out, men are just statistically more likely to develop Parkinson's disease than women are. It creates this very clear difference in risk between the sexes.
Okay, so after looking at all this evidence, the biology in the brain, the genetic clues, the environmental suspects, and those unavoidable risks, what's the current verdict? How do we put all of these puzzle pieces together?
Well, here's the verdict as it stands today. For the vast majority of people, there just isn't a single cause. The answer is this unique, complex interplay of factors that's different for each person. It's like the genetic hand you were dealt, played out over a lifetime of different environmental exposures, all of it filtered through the simple, unavoidable process of aging. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Every new gene that's found, every environmental link that's confirmed, it's another piece of the puzzle getting locked into place. But will we ever solve it completely? Will we get to a point where we can tell every single person their own unique story of how their Parkinson's began? The answer to that question? Well, it could unlock not just the cause, but maybe one day the cure. And that's the hope that keeps driving science forward.